black man was wrongfully convicted, but what he discovered about the judge will shock you. Malcolm Hayes spent years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, until he uncovered a terrifying secret that changed everything. The same judge who sentenced him had built his career on lies, bribes, and stolen futures, sending innocent black men to prison just to fill his pockets. Nelson Brooks sat in a small coffee shop. His fingers tapped on his laptop. An email had arrived an hour ago. No name, no sender, just one line of text. Look into Judge Calloway. Look into Detective Briggs. They have sent hundreds of black men to prison for nothing. His heart pounded. He had spent years uncovering corruption, but this felt different, bigger, more dangerous. He looked around. Was someone watching him? He shut his laptop, grabbed his bag, and left the shop. The cold air hit his face as he walked quickly home. Back in his small apartment, Nelson got to work. He searched old court records, police reports, and news articles. It did not take long to see a pattern. Case after case. Young black men arrested with no real evidence. The same officers. The same judge. Harsh sentences for small crimes. Life sentences for minor offenses. His stomach turned. Hundreds of black men. Lives ruined. Families broken. Nelson rubbed his eyes. He needed more proof. A witness. A source. Someone who had seen the corruption firsthand. The next day, he met with Elaine Johnson. She was a mother whose son had been locked up for a crime he did not commit. She held a picture of him. Tears ran down her face. They put drugs in his car, she whispered. He was coming home from work. He had never been in trouble before. Nelson listened. His hands tightened under the table. Elaine was not the first mother with this story, and she would not be the last. Later, Nelson met Harold Mason. He was a former police officer willing to talk. They met in a parking garage, hidden from sight. I tried to stop it, Harold said in a low voice. I saw officers planting evidence, forcing confessions. I reported it. Then they threatened my family. They made sure I lost my job. Nelson took a deep breath. Do you have proof? Harold hesitated. Then, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. This is their ledger. Names, payments, false charges. Everything. Nelson's hand shook as he flipped through the pages. It was all here. Bribes. Lies. Innocent people sent to prison. For 3 days, Nelson stayed locked in his apartment, writing. Every detail, every fact, every name. He checked his sources again and again. This was the biggest story of his life. Then, he hit publish. The article spread fast. Social media exploded. People were angry. Judge Richard Calloway and Detective Owen Briggs had built their careers by destroying innocent black lives. But danger followed. That night, Nelson's phone buzzed. An unknown number. Run. Click. A chill ran down his spine. He turned off the lights and looked through the blinds. A black SUV was parked outside. His heart pounded. The hunt had begun. Nelson's hands shook as he held his phone. A black SUV was outside his apartment. It had not moved. They were watching him. He took a deep breath, grabbed his backpack, and left through the back door. He had to go. When he returned hours later, his apartment door was open. His stomach felt tight. He stepped inside slowly, his heart beating fast. Papers were everywhere. His laptop was gone. His notes and files were missing. It was a warning. He rushed to his desk and opened a drawer. His backup drive was still there. He felt a little relief. But then he saw something on his wall. A message written in red marker. Stop or you're next. Nelson felt cold. He had seen threats before, but this one felt real. The next morning, he tried calling Elaine Johnson. No answer. He called again. Nothing. He tried Harold Mason. His number did not work. Fear filled his chest. He searched online for news. Then he saw it. Former officer Harold Mason found dead in apparent suicide. Nelson's hands clenched. He knew Harold did not kill himself. The Brotherhood had killed him. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You're next. Nelson stood up. His heart was racing. He had to leave. Now. He packed quickly and left through the back. He had no idea where to go. He just had to keep moving. He took the subway, changing trains every few stops. He kept his head down, avoiding cameras. Then, he saw his face on a news screen at a station. Investigative journalist Nelson Brooks wanted for obstruction of justice and possession of stolen documents. His mouth went dry. They had framed him. Now, he was a fugitive. For 2 days, Nelson hid in an old motel. He barely slept. Every sound made him jump. Then he got a tip. A man named Malcolm Hayes wanted to meet. Malcolm had been in prison for years. Judge Calloway had convicted him. Malcolm escaped when he learned they planned to kill him in prison. Nelson hesitated. It could be a trap, but he had no other choice. They met in an empty warehouse. Malcolm was tall. His eyes looked tired. A scar ran down his cheek. He looked like a man who had lost everything. They put me in prison for something I didn't do, Malcolm said. Calloway and his people set me up. I have proof. Nelson leaned in. What proof? Malcolm pulled out a small, old notebook. Names, dates, money transfers. I took this before I escaped. Nelson flipped through it. This was exactly what he needed. I want revenge, Malcolm said. And I want justice. Nelson nodded. Then we take them down. Together. Nelson and Malcolm sat in a small motel room. Papers covered the bed. A notebook lay open between them. Malcolm pointed at a name. This man handled the bribes, he said. If we find him, we get proof. Nelson nodded. They needed more than words in a notebook. They needed real evidence. They spent hours looking through old court records. Malcolm remembered faces and places from the past. Nelson searched online, connecting cases. Then he found something. A hidden file. It listed names, dates, and payments. It proved that Judge Calloway and his people sent innocent black men to prison. It was buried in an old case that no one had checked in years. Nelson's heart beat fast. This is it, he whispered. This is the proof we need. They needed help. Nelson called Nia Johnson, a civil rights lawyer. She had fought for justice for years. When he called, she listened. Then she said, "Come to my office." Now, Nelson and Malcolm moved carefully through the city, avoiding cameras and police. When they arrived, Nia locked the door behind them. She looked at the files and shook her head. "I knew they were corrupt," she said. "But this is worse than I thought." She agreed to help. She hid them in a safe house and gave them legal advice. "You need to go public," she told them. "But you need a witness." Malcolm knew one man who could help, a former Brotherhood member. He had tried to leave the group years ago. If they could find him, he might talk. They tracked him down to a small house outside the city. When they got there, the front door was open. Nelson felt sick. Something was wrong. They stepped inside. The house was silent. A chair was knocked over. Papers lay on the floor. Then they saw him. The man was dead. A bullet wound in his chest. The Brotherhood had found him first. Malcolm clenched his fists. "They're watching us." Nelson felt a chill run down his spine. They were running out of time. With Nelson still wanted by the police, they knew they had to act fast. The Brotherhood would keep killing to protect their secrets. They couldn't wait any longer. Nelson pulled out his phone. "We go public now." He sent the files to every major news outlet. He uploaded them online. He sent them to activists, lawyers, and anyone who would listen. Within minutes, the internet was on fire. The truth was out, but so was their location. Outside, the sound of sirens filled the air. Nelson's heart pounded. They had to escape fast. Malcolm looked out the window. "They're coming," he said. Nelson grabbed the files and stuffed them into his bag. Nia called. "You need to move now," she warned. "I'm sending a car." They ran out the back door, staying in the shadows. The sirens grew louder. Malcolm led the way, moving quickly through alleys. Nelson followed, breathing hard. They reached a street corner, and a black car stopped suddenly. The door swung open. "Get in," Nia's driver yelled. They jumped in. The car sped off. Nelson turned back. Police and Brotherhood members swarmed the motel. They had made it out just in time. But they weren't safe yet. As they drove, Nia spoke over the phone. "The files are everywhere. People are talking. The Brotherhood is losing control." Malcolm clenched his fists. They won't go down without a fight. Nelson knew that too. They needed one last move. Something big. Something to end this for good. He looked at Malcolm. "We need to confront Calloway. We need him to admit everything." Malcolm nodded. "I know where he'll be." Nia hesitated. "That's dangerous. If you do this, there's no turning back." Nelson took a deep breath. "We've come too far to stop now." The car turned down a quiet road. The fight wasn't over, but the end was near. Nelson's face was everywhere. Every news channel, every website had the same headline: "Investigative journalist wanted for murder." He sat in the back of the car, holding his phone tightly. His whole body felt heavy. Judge Calloway and Detective Briggs had framed him. The Brotherhood wanted to make sure he had nowhere to hide. Malcolm clenched his fists. They're saying you killed that witness. Nelson shook his head. They got to him first. Now they want to make sure I take the blame. The Brotherhood was doing more than accusing him. They were turning the whole city against him. The news called him dangerous. People online wanted him arrested. Some even wanted him dead. Nia's voice came through the speaker. We don't have much time, she said. The police are everywhere. Nelson took a deep breath. Then we need to move fast. Their last chance was Judge Calloway's office. If they could break in and get the files, they could prove the truth. It was late at night when they reached the courthouse. The building was dark and quiet. Malcolm picked the lock on a back door, and they slipped inside. Nelson led the way, his heart racing. The office was on the second floor. They had only minutes. Inside Calloway's office, Malcolm worked on the safe. Nelson searched the desk, flipping through folders. Nothing. Then Malcolm grinned. Got it. He pulled out flash drives and papers. Emails. Bank statements. Recordings. It was all here. The proof they needed. Nelson grabbed the files. Let's go. They almost made it. A loud voice echoed down the hall. Stop. It was Detective Briggs. Malcolm pulled Nelson back. Run. They sprinted down the hall. Footsteps pounded behind them. A shot rang out. Nelson ducked as a bullet shattered a window beside him. They burst through the exit, racing toward the car. Malcolm stumbled. Nelson caught him. Blood soaked Malcolm's sleeve. I'm fine, Malcolm said. Keep moving. They reached the car. Nia's driver hit the gas. Nelson pressed his hand over Malcolm's wound. They had barely escaped. Back at the safe house, Malcolm groaned in pain. Nia wrapped his arm in bandages. We need to get him to a hospital. No, Malcolm said. Not yet. Nelson held up the flash drive. We end this now. He turned to Nia. Can you get this to the press? Nia nodded. I'll make sure the whole country sees it. Nelson looked at Malcolm. This is it. Malcolm smiled weakly. Let's bring him down. Nelson hit send. The file spread online. Social media exploded. News stations reported the corruption of Judge Calloway and Detective Briggs. People were outraged. Protests began. The Brotherhood was losing power. Then the lights went out. Nelson's stomach twisted. He grabbed a flashlight and looked outside. Black SUVs lined the street. The Brotherhood wasn't finished. They found us, he whispered. Nia pulled out a gun. We won't go down without a fight. Footsteps rushed up the stairs. The door burst open. Armed men stormed in. Malcolm pushed Nelson. Run. Nelson hesitated. He couldn't leave them. But Malcolm shoved him toward the back exit. Go. Nelson ran. Gunshots echoed behind him. His chest burned, but he didn't stop. He slipped into an alley, hiding behind a dumpster. His breath came in short gasps. Then, a car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down. It was Nia's driver. Get in. Nelson climbed inside. What about Malcolm and Nia? The driver shook his head. We have to go. Now. Tears burned Nelson's eyes. He gritted his teeth. He couldn't stop now. He had to finish what they started. The car sped off into the night. The war wasn't over. But the world finally knew the truth. Nelson sat in the back of the car, holding the flash drive tightly. His hands were shaking. His heart was beating fast. The Brotherhood was close. But he had no time to be scared. He had to act now. He turned to Nia. We need to go live. Nia nodded. She opened her laptop and connected to a safe network. We will show this to news stations, activists, and the public. Once it is out, they cannot stop it. Nelson took a deep breath and pressed record. This is Nelson Brooks, he said, trying to stay calm. For years, Judge Calloway and Detective Briggs have sent innocent black men to prison. The Brotherhood controls the courts with lies, bribes, and threats. But today, the truth will be known. He uploaded the files. One by one, the proof appeared on screens across the country. A video of Calloway laughing as he sent an innocent man to jail. Fake police reports. Bank records showing bribes for guilty verdicts. The internet exploded. People were shocked, angry, and horrified. The truth could not be hidden anymore. Protests began. Crowds filled the streets, demanding justice. People held signs with Nelson's name. They wanted Calloway, Briggs, and the Brotherhood arrested. The pressure was too much. The FBI had to act. Agents surrounded Calloway's mansion. Cameras recorded him as he was taken away in handcuffs. Detective Briggs was arrested at the police station, his face pale. One by one, Brotherhood members were caught. The system that had protected them for years was finally breaking. Nelson watched the news from a safe house. He took a deep breath. The fight was over, but they had lost so much.